Good afternoon, and welcome to Marketing Evolution's The Facts and Fiction of Attribution, tips on how to use your brand to find a competitive advantage in the marketplace. A quick couple of housekeeping points to cover before we get started. We do have a hashtag for today's webinar. It's hashtag MKTGROI webinar. Marketing ROI webinar. If you tweet or post Marketing Evolution, we'll be able to follow that hashtag and we'll be able to comment and interact with you in social media. Also, we'll be able to take questions today. I've put up a screen capture where you can enter your question. We will review the questions and ask them at the end. So please feel free to click on the questions box and submit your questions throughout the presentation. Sachin and Rex will be able to answer them at the end. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Larry Gamache. I'm the founder of a company called Blue Pen Partners and a former customer of Marketing Evolution while I was the communications director at Carfax. I'm really pleased to introduce Rex Briggs, the founder and CEO of Marketing Evolution, and Sachin Pai, the manager of brand health analytics at IBM. Today, as you can see on your screen, we're going to cover a few key points. First, Rex is going to talk about some of the current landscape in marketing attribution, what's working and what's not. And then we plan to have an open conversation between Rex and Sachin about IBM's journey to unified measurement and the things that they're doing to get better insight on how their brand is driving value for their company. Sachin will share some of the challenges for IBM and some of the things that they were seeking to uncover by working with a company like Marketing Evolution. And then we'll outline some of the steps that they've been taking during their initial engagement with an attribution platform, some of the lessons learned, some of the things that they would do differently, and some of the tips that we might be able to share to help people get to meaningful optimizations more quickly. So without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Rex Briggs, the founder of Marketing Evolution, and he'll begin today's conversation.
Well, thanks, Larry, and thanks for hosting today. Sachin is really the star today. It's been great working with him and with the IBM team. And you can think of Larry and I as co-stars. And given Larry's background experience, I'm going to ask him to comment as well because I think he can add value to this conversation. So you've got some research folks, you've got some communications folks, all getting together with you on this webinar to address some of the issues around attribution, to take some of your questions, have a good discussion. And as I start off, I would say that one of the things we wanted to look at was some of the facts and fictions, some what's working, what's not working, and looking at how Gartner and Forrester talk about it, I think is pretty handy. Gartner's point was that when they've interviewed marketers, their CEB unit talked to over 100 of them. They said, look, people are frustrated that what's not working is these backwards-looking mixed models or this look-back period. When in fact you need to be trying to deal with the next sale or achieve the next sale, or only measuring the behavior and not measuring the attitude part or the brand part, especially if you're trying to reposition a brand, especially trying to change the way people think about a brand, or the situation where the individual consumer segments and the profiles of people aren't being taken into consideration. And as a result, marketers know that they aren't getting as high of ROI as they could, they're not being as efficient as they could, and understandably, they're looking for new solutions and new ways of approaching it. Forrester will be coming out with their latest measurement and optimization wave on Monday. I will actually be reading my copy of it on the advanced copy of it on the airplane today. If you guys would like a copy, do send us a note, and we'll make sure that we get reprint rights and share that with you. But in their last wave, they talked about how the mixed models weren't detailed enough and attribution wasn't holistic, and that really what marketers needed was a combination of the data management, the analytics, connected to the buying systems to have a more complete, holistic, fast solution that's truly actionable. So I do feel like we're going from a world where measurement used to be something you would do for insights, maybe once a year or once a quarter. to a world where we're expecting both to get those quarterly strategic insights, maybe a quarterly business review, as well as tactical applications and immediate optimization and more detailed. And I think part of that's because as marketers have gotten more sophisticated and expected more from a data-driven approach, they've recognized that there's so much more data available. And even though we live in an incredibly fragmented, complex world, you can connect a lot of data, people where they were, what billboards they walked by, what TV ads they consumed, what digital ads they were delivered, what emails they received, what webinars they attended. You can piece that together, and you can begin to get tactical insights about which message was influencing which person. So I think the misnomer or another fiction in mixed modeling is this idea of your TV ROI or your social media ROI or your Facebook ROI or your pick a media. That was perpetuated by these very old models that were so slow that they aggregated all the messages together and all the people together into one number presented once a year. There's a P&G guy that I once saw that used to carry a laminated index card of what the ROI for the different media. And when salespeople would come in, he'd pull out his little card and say, nope, and put it away if the media wasn't to the right ROI. And it was actually, I mean, it's a true story, but it's completely ridiculous because the ROI isn't the media ROI. It's actually the message delivered to an individual person. And you can change the media ROI if you end up having stronger creative. You can change the media ROI if you end up having better targeting. And so the fact is that we need to be looking at message level optimization at an individual person and recognize that marketers actually have a lot more room to increase their ROI and their performance if they're getting results fast enough at that level of detail where you can make in-campaign optimization.
Well, our marketing in the marketplace is always on, and through some of these tools and with the right attribution partners, your marketing can always be on. You can be optimizing and improving your message and your mix continuously, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that the always on part, the in-campaign part is still at the frontier. There's still a lot of friction in the system. And part of the reason why we took additional capital at Marketing Evolution was to hire more engineers and to streamline and remove more friction and have more direct connectors into buying platforms and speed up the optimization cycle. So people in our entertainment customers are the fastest in optimizing. Some of them are optimizing multiple times a week. Retail can be about a week. And then we have but most marketers, and this gets into the crawl, walk, run point that we shared in the description of this event. Most people don't start off with that immediate optimization right now, this second. They start off with, in a crawl phase, saying, hey, how can we optimize maybe at a quarterly basis, maybe at a monthly basis? And then how do we speed that process up as we begin to get into the cycles and get comfortable with the data, get used to using the software, get used to getting all your questions answered on the methodology standpoint. Then you're in a good position to go into the walk phase where you begin to automate and streamline more of the data coming in and automate more of the media buys going out. And that begins to change the game from what the old world we had of looking back to beginning to look forward. So now you're saying, how do I influence the next sale right now? How do I begin to anticipate what media and messages and targeting and price points that I should be doing to optimize and get the best value out of the campaign? And so bringing it over to IBM, one of the things that I was really excited about with IBM is that they are part of that new generation of ROI thinking, where they recognize that as the brand is growing and developing and changing in many ways, that the old tools and techniques weren't going to be fast enough, they weren't going to be detailed enough, and in fact they were missing a really key piece, which is the brand component and the parts that are actually potentially at the leading edge of what they need to do to be successful in the long run. So with that, I'd like to maybe turn it over to Sachin to talk more about his story.
Great, thanks, Rex. So as Rex was mentioning, so traditional marketing, performance marketing has a very clear dependent variable, right? Some kind of sale, some kind of activity that's easy to track. what me and my team, what we focus is on the brand, right? Trying to understand what are the thoughts and perceptions of our target audience. So what do they think about IBM? So we have several tools to measure the brand. We do surveys, we do social listening, we do look at organic search. We look at across a variety of tools to measure what the perceptions are. But the challenge that we had for a long time was tying perception to advertising and media, right? So we were able to do correlations to media, which is not great, and mainly because a large portion of our advertising was offline, right? So offline, there's no such thing as click-through rate or any kind of digital tracking to understand does that media touch point provide any impact. For our digital portion, we were able to do some kind of connection, right? So did someone click on an ad? Did someone view an ad, and did they engage on a page afterwards, right? So those are two ways that we were measuring, but they're not ideal. They're not necessarily saying that someone thinks of IBM better now that they've been exposed. So we're constantly challenged by what media is working, what media is not working, and every brand, every organization faces this, but an added level of complexity because it was the brand what we're trying to understand and measure. And with that direct connection, we were quite challenged. Then this when we engaged. Yeah, Rex, you want to say something?
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, this is when we engaged with Market Evolution to help kind of provide a stronger framework and structure to kind of tie those two pieces together: our advertising, our messaging, and our media, and how that impacts our perception in the market.
So I wanted to just have you share a bit about the kind of the need for speed, and as you're talking about going faster and being able to take actions faster, getting onboarded faster. I mean, you've been through some of these before that I think you're sharing could take a long time, long time to get to value. Talk about your need for speed and what you wanted to see in terms of onboarding and being able to take action at a faster rate.
Yeah, so I can speak to the onboarding part. So we had experience with another attribution vendor, and the implementation timeline was very long, mainly because they were very specific on how the implementation needed to happen, and IBM's is just a large company, right? We do a lot of media. What we found very quickly working with the Marketing Evolution team was that there was a lot of flexibility in how they could accept our files and accept our tech stack, right? We have I think everyone has a unique tech stack, but they were very flexible. You guys are very flexible in trying to understand what we were doing and accommodate what we needed. So I think that alone was another kind of big factor in kind of in working with you guys, kind of the flexibility and the flexibility in working with our platform and not being very specific on how things need to be done.
Yeah, the theory behind that is that there's a crawl, walk, run. That if you can be flexible in the beginning part and let people get you what we need and get the first optimization or two optimizations, you've built enough goodwill and you've shown enough value that makes it easier for you, Sachin, to go back and say, okay, guys, now we want to automate it and streamline it and make it faster and more efficient so we can do it a regular process. So that's part of that crawl, walk, run strategy. The other part of the strategy was mapping in your organization before who is actually going to take action on this, who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed using the RACI format. We don't always get this perfect the first time. Sometimes you get the initial team involved, and then you come back 6 months into it and say, hey, who else should be involved? Talk to us about your journey as you use that RACI format and how you decided who to involve in the first wave and who you involve in the second wave and so forth.
Sure. So my team, we're in the research department, and we support a lot of the advertising media to understand, again, what our perceptions are and give some recommendation optimization. So it was really the research department and our advertising media partners working together to, like, in the initial conversations on this. In terms of who actually implements the work and executes the finding, it's the agency, right? The agency really are the frontline people in the decision making. So one thing that in retrospect we should have done is try to include them earlier in the conversation to make sure they were bought into it, they understood the platform, what we're trying to do, so that they could be more informed in the process.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And you had some experience with that too, Larry, on your side. You're Racy. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Sasha, as you mentioned, there were people inside the organization and people at our agencies who were comfortable measuring their performance with the tools that they were currently using. And we found it really important to get our agency partners and other members of the team at Carfax involved early and really have a lot of transparency into how we were going to be measuring success and implementing change and helping them feel like they were a part of that early on. And we felt like that helped move the ball forward more quickly. Another very practical thing we did was to tie our agency's bonuses and compensation to implementation of the optimizations that were being delivered by the Marketing Evolution platform. So a little bit of a carrot, a little bit of a stick in terms of driving adoption among the team and the agencies.
I think that's such an interesting insight because you were sitting as a communication director, Sachin's sitting in the research, and I think it's harder sometimes for research to be able to drive contractual bonuses to the agencies. So you almost need to have a few more ways of engagement. And so I know, Sachin, you're going through, as you're looking at now, you're like, okay, man, we've got the first few optimizations. We've done that now. And you're starting to think about, hey, what's the next group of people you want to involve and how you build that buy-in. Is there any tips you would have for people as they think about pulling more people into the process?
Yeah, so what we've been doing over the last few months is taking these results and sharing them with all the different stakeholders involved. Again, IBM's a large organization, multiple interests, multiple agendas. So I think kind of tailoring the presentation of the readouts and the reports to kind of understand how this impacts multiple facets of the organization, and trying to tailor that conversation, tailor that message to kind of specify their own needs and how it could help them. So that's really what we've been doing, is really communicating the results over the last few months to each of the individual teams.
Yeah, it's a great sort of non-threatening way to socialize and get people engaged and involved and kind of bring them into the tent. So the other thing that I think we learned in the process is that there are two critical roles that Racy doesn't have out of the box, which is the implementers, the people that actually have to buy the media, and the quality assurance, because as much as we'd love to have all the data coming out of the agencies, especially in traditional, TV and so forth, it can come in dirty or messy or just wrong because agencies weren't incentivized or required really to have quality data. And it didn't become apparent until you began to ingest it into something like the ROI brain that, actually, if that, I'll give you a real world example, and then, that's not IBM, but there was one marketer that we saw last week who was getting double counts in their digital ads because they had a Spanish version and English version, each with different tags, so they could tell which one was fired, but they didn't think about how that would affect their counting system. So talk a little bit about data quality, quality assurance part, and then beginning to engage people who will implement. I know you're just right on that cusp right now.
Yeah, we're just on the cusp. Like we've done a few readouts, and now we're in the process of data cleanliness. And I think this is an issue that a lot of organizations face. Like with this advances in big data, I think data quality and data hygiene is such an issue that we are still struggling with, even being IBM. So a lot of it is a kind of confirmation, working with the teams to make sure everyone's okay with the inputs. So like there's a certain level of comfort. We understand we won't be perfect, but there's generally across all the teams involved. So the agency, the media team, our internal media team and advertising team, as well as the research team, is all aligned on the inputs and making sure we're all in agreement as to what the story is, right? I think that's kind of where we can get for just agreement on the quality of the data. We're trying our best to get there.
Yeah, it's funny though. One of the things we found really important was having these different people at the table, and finding the right people to get involved also helped us figure out the metrics by which we were going to define success. And what it gave us was insight into how these different members of the team were already measuring which of those measurements might be valuable moving forward. And to your point, by bringing that visibility, it helped us figure out things like where were we overcounting or where were we not counting well enough. And that conversation about defining success and really figuring out how we were going to measure it was another key milestone in our journey to getting through that initial crawl phase.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and we'll talk about how IBM defines success and thinks about it. But as a bridge to that point, sometimes when you have multiple agencies sitting around the table or multiple stakeholders internally responsible for those agencies, the SEO person might be looking at really, really differently than someone who's trying to say, change the brand or achieve the top line sales part. And so this visual here is a representation of what we call the hub and spoke chart, and it's used when we first implement a customer to ask them what's the definition of success. In each of the different cases, we've done it a little bit different. For Carpax, we interviewed people separately, and then we brought you guys all together in a room and said, well, there's 80%, 90% alignment here. Let's talk about where there are some differences. And then you guys ended up having 2 nodes for some good, very good reasons. And in IBM's case, you guys did it all as a group, right? And so you could do it more collaboratively as a work strategy workshop. Sachin, tell us more about, as you're defining success, a little bit about that process and aligning everyone on, hey, this is what we're really trying to achieve.
Yeah, so we got some general guidance from a CMO as to what were some of the key factors that were important to her. And then, so we had these 4 or 5 different KPIs that we're looking at. Again, our KPIs were all around perception, right? And it's a little bit more difficult to measure. And the next exercise after we had that, those 4 or 5 measurements, we wanted to validate and confirm that those KPIs actually led to some kind of business result, business performance. So, like for example, consideration. Does it actually lead to revenue? Does it actually lead to more leads coming in? And that helped kind of tie the conversation between the work that we were doing on the brand and perception side to the more performance marketing side, right? So they were like, okay, it's fine. You could focus on this brand because we know a lift in brand now leads to a lift in our leads. So that since we had that kind of connection and we've solidified that connection and showed it through data, it made this conversation easier of how to kind of get acceptance on this solution across the organization, right? It helps everyone across the board.
Well, and you just hit on something that's really pretty breakthrough in the industry, which is that ability to connect brand to behavior,
Yep.
brand perception leads, and that ability with person-based models to do a longitudinal analysis and establish the conversion rates and how that works is really quite new in the industry. I mean, brand tracking's been around since the 1970s. It's as old as I am, and for all those decades, we didn't really have the ability to connect it to actual sales behavior one for one, but now you did. And as you pointed out, that really helps align people on metrics to say, okay, if that's what the CMO is saying is the goal, then how do these things connect? And some of the other ones, though, that you had looked at that maybe sometimes there's metrics that you discard a bit or that were being used potentially incorrectly, like sometimes CPMs or maybe click-throughs can sometimes be misleading. Talk to us a little bit about how you began to rationalize some of the other metrics that are floating around there.
And to be honest, we're still struggling with that, right? We have some of our stakeholders, some of our partners are still arguing for more of these traditional metrics such as CPM, click-through rate, or engagement rate. And we're trying to rally behind more of these kind of perception metrics. And the reason why that's important is if you optimize against the click-through rate, you're looking at less than 1% of the population, right? Like 0.1% of the population. You're making decisions on a tiny fraction of people that are exposed to your advertisements, right? And so it's really difficult to say with confidence that these are the right decisions. It's also implying that when you make a decision on click-through rate or engagement rate, it's implying that other 99.5% of the people that didn't do anything, they were not impacted or driven by the ad. So that was one of the challenges we're still facing. That's some of the challenges we're facing. And I think where we're trying to go to here is saying, hey, it's more than just people clicking or coming to the website, right? It's all this upper funnel work is what we're trying to move here, and it's not measured by those traditional metrics.
It's funny. It's like in our experience, the email marketing person who is chasing that click-through rate, the open rate, and the click-through rate, and they seem to, if they just look at their own data, seem to be getting improvement, but fail to realize that they're creating some negative brand perceptions among some really engaged and important customers or prospects. And without that holistic view into our entire marketing mix, they can run amok and be creating some real problems and hurting efforts in other channels.
Yeah. I think that unification is really important, because I think what Sachin's doing now is, what we're doing for him is we're building a database of relationships between those metrics. And he's right. Today, we can't put a nail in the coffin of some of these older metrics just yet, but we're building the case for that, so that as you get to the end of the year, when you do the longitudinal analysis, to say, well, how predictive, or how much does that metric actually contribute? Is it on the consumer journey? Is it really a required checkpoint or step? And that's when you get to reset the metrics. And I think it's a good expectation, as Sachin was saying, to have this definition of success in that picture, begin to rally people around, and then begin to assemble the data to come back to the issue of which metrics are predictive.
And I wouldn't argue that click-through rate or engagement rate, these aren't bad metrics, right? But especially for brand objectives, click-through rate and engagement rate don't measure what we're trying to do. Like, click-through helps with performance marketing. You want people to come to the website. You want to take some kind of action. So it is a measure in the possibility of different measurements you can look at. But with brand-related work, I feel like it's the wrong thing to be looking to evaluating.
Yeah. That is a great point.
But I think that's the point too of this, identifying the key data and getting it to come into a unified view of how you're measuring, so that you can understand the impacts. Yeah, I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I think click-through rates are bad. It's just at the pursuing those at the expense of other things, or not understanding how they work together. So I was wondering, Rex, what advice do you have for people about how to bring all that data together, automate its flow, and really keep those insights going?
Yeah, it's important to bring them together. I think that's the key point. I think that's the idea behind this chart here, is that you can bring in your engagement rate, your click-through rate, your email open rate, you can also bring in your reach and your frequency of the TV. We can bring in the leads, and we can connect that with identity down to an individual person and see how they become associated. And so. Yeah, I think the first advice is, when you first are if you break it down to crawl, walk, run, in the crawl phase, don't try to do everything. Get focused on what that key performance indicator is, and connect the most important media. And we'll help provide guidance on, hey, here's how we pull in TV and digital and so forth. And try to optimize and begin to share that with the team, so they see, oh, I can optimize on a brand perception or on awareness. Those times can oftentimes be faster than getting your leads and all of your behavioral data connected. As people get experience with that, then they're prepared better to then interpret and make sense out of it when you do bring the behavioral data in when you get to the walk phase. And as you have success at the crawl and the walk stage, now people have more motivation to say, oh, okay, now I do want to invest in automating that data and standardizing that data. Number one, it'll make it less work for the agency. Number two, it'll make better quality of data coming in. Number three, it means that we can go faster and do more cycles of optimization. So I think that all that goodness comes from that crawl, walk, run, breaking down the problem.
And Sachin, you made the point of early on, being able to work with the data that you had, as opposed to, maybe you don't have everything available at once. But what was that experience like at IBM? What sorts of things did you have, and what made it possible to move forward?
Well, at IBM, we try to work in an agile fashion, right? So it's always an iterative approach, and we're trying to work towards MVP. So the MVP was like, hey, what data sets do we have accessible? What could we implement today? And let's constantly iterate on that to build like our end solution. The end solution is going to be, can we incorporate as many data points that we think impacts perception, right? So it's not just advertising and media, but all these kind of exogenous variables have an impact on it, and that's kind of the ultimate stage where we want to get to. But like you guys are talking about, it's a slow process, and let's start with the data that's available today.
The goal being, of course, to get to your first optimization, right, Rex? So
yeah, that's right. I am a firm believer that, and I've just seen this time and time again, that that the people who have said, I'm going to build this entire data lake, I'm going to assemble all the data and connect, it's like, you know what, I'm going to check back at that company because they're not going to be there in 2 years, and they won't have done, they won't have accomplished anything. And maybe those two are related. It's hard because it's a natural instinct. I mean, I think that that's part of how some of us are hardwired to say, let me first get my arms around everything I need and then I'll do it. And it has to be, as Sachin said, it has to be embracing a more agile part, which is what is the MVP, what's the most valuable, what's the greatest value we can create in the shortest amount of time. And Carfax is also an agile organization. So I think the people that get benefit faster, we're trying to export that agile part that we've seen in the best companies that move faster in that part. And and you've got an example of an optimization with the key data blanked out for IBM. But when you begin to deal with it theoretically and think about what does this all mean, people process it one way. But then when you actually show the data and say you're going to spend more money here, you're going to spend less money here. This ad's working in this way. This ad is working for this other segment. People process it in a different way. And they begin to ask new questions about how the analysis system worked. They begin to have new insights. Well, what if I gave you this extra data? What if we also got this piece of information? Could that help? And it snowballs and becomes really effective. So I think it's important to try to get to an optimization fast and know that set people's expectations that they're not going to necessarily make all of the actions on it immediately. It's a learning event. We actually schedule it to be 90 minutes initially, and then we begin to bring it down to 30 minutes after people are fully educated and used to using it, because you only need 30 minutes. But it starts out being more of a learning experience.
And this is the point where IBM is today, correct?
Yeah, so we're in the transition from, I would say, crawl to walk, and we had a few readouts, and we've tried our best to digest all the kind of the recommendations, insights out of the platform. But in terms of making the optimizations, I would say right now we are directionally kind of taking in like broad picture. What are the themes that's coming out of this platform and trying to embrace those. We're not taking every placement recommendation, right? We're still getting comfortable with the platform, want to make sure it works, do some analysis to test that the results are validating. But yeah, directionally, we're taking the results out of it, and hopefully one day, as we get more comfortable with the solution and kind of implementing it, we'll take more of a prescriptive approach out of this.
And that's a really interesting transition from that prescriptive approach from that point, because what Sachin's described is exactly that crawl, walk, run progression that we expect, that we sort of build in. And then that shift to that prescriptive part, which you guys got to at Carfax, and maybe you can talk a little about that. That becomes really interesting, because then you do hold the agencies accountable for implementing, 80% of the recommendations, and you give them some freedom to make some changes. You begin to push more automation and say, how do I make that data move faster in the buying platforms? And it begins to really generate a much larger competitive advantage. And it truly is qualitatively different than what the experience was with mixed models or attribution, which is all backwards looking. It really becomes, hey, this is the way we manage marketing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think for us, the things on which we might have spent more time in the past were things that were happening somewhat automatically or without a lot of conversation, or right, the system suggested that we move money, and the people responsible for that, the implementers, they would move the money. And we found that our conversations with the agencies and internally were focused more on discovery, test and learns, really brainstorming the what next, and the things that we would talk about it, seeking the new plateau, right? The things that would give us the X% change in our marketing impact, as opposed to the optimization incrementality, but looking for those things that were just game changers, the ideas that would really move the needle. So
that's what you have to look forward to, Sachin, next. So let's
Yeah.
talk about where we're at.
Well, I just want to make one
So
more comment in terms of speed. So as we're kind of getting the insights, one thing we're slowly learning is that, or I'm learning is that making TV buys, you have to plan quarters in advance, right? You just can't find an insight and change TV quickly. You can change the creative, obviously, but you can't change the media. You're locked into that. So one thing that we've learned is trying to get involved in the process as early as possible to make those decisions, be at the table to make those decisions well in advance. I think is really important. I think the speed of finding those insights obviously is a component of that.
yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think what we're trying to do at Marketing Evolution is we're trying to use the scale that we have, that we have 75 plus brands on the platform now today, to begin to go back to media owners, particularly in TV, and say, hey, we need you to be able to be more flexible.
Right.
And we've got people like Comcast, NBC Universal. If they have one more merger, their name won't fit on the building anymore. But we've got, but they own so many different things now, which is really cool, because you can say, well, if you have a master contract and buy, when you negotiate the upfront part, here's the language to put in there that will let the ROI brain system have more flexibility to move things within it. And they've given us the green light. And so Patty Glott on our team, if you happen to be a customer listening to this and want to look at that connection, is the person who's taking point on helping on the upfront negotiation and some of the contract that gives you more flexibility. The second thing we're doing is we're taking some of that $20+ million of investment, and we're putting that into the Connect to Buy, because as television does become more addressable, or at least more automated, we can shrink that cycle time down, and we can build into the intelligence of the software how much lead days you need to be able to make that change in that buy. So I'm really excited about that as we go forward in that year. But most people don't expect to do that right out of the gate, because I think, to Sachin's point, you first have to get people used to it and socialize it. And then you get to that walk phase, and then you begin to automate it. And then as you automate it, then you're ready to basically shorten the cycles and go faster and faster.
Well, we use the software to help us define, to Sasha's point, we use the software to help us define what that minimum investment would be consistent on television. You know, the place where the Marketing Evolution platform was telling us, yeah, you're never really going to go beyond this level on, you know, in this group of channels. And so that's what we would move to the upfront, and the cost benefit of, you know, keeping the ability to optimize. The system was telling us that there was more benefit in keeping the ability to optimize than there was to moving that money into the upfront. So we were using the system, exactly to Sachin's point, to determine how much money we should commit and how much money we should keep flexible.
Yeah, it's exciting. So Sachin, talk to us a little bit about your results and the potential upside that you're seeing. I know we're not going to share specific data here, but just talk about maybe what you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, is like we're in the transition period from crawl to walk. We've taken some of these recommendations as much as we can, because like a lot of the TV buys, which is a big portion of our budget, is already locked in. So the upside is limited just because of timing, right? But now that we understand what the recommendations are and how we can influence the decisions sooner on in the process, we can hopefully start making decisions quicker, or provide a little more of a lead time as to when the decisions happen. Yeah.
Yeah, outstanding. And we're going to jump over to this idea of wrap up, and then if you have questions, I mean, feel free to submit your questions, and we'll take the ones that we can. So just getting to the facts part, we talked earlier about some of the fictions and some of the challenges, and so I think the takeaway facts: data integration is possible. You can put together online, offline, attitudinal data, leads or sales behavior. You can link brand to consumer behavior, which is really important, because for many years those have existed in different silos, and I think IBM is proving that you can bring that together in a meaningful way. And as you begin to move to the optimization of person level, message by message, there's oftentimes more flexibility. Even if your media is locked in, you've got flexibility within the message part. And if you set it up right, you may also get more flexibility in the message part as well. I think those would be important takeaways that are perhaps different than what people have experienced with a backwards-looking attribution or a mixed model. Any other ones that you would add, Sachin or Larry, on what are some other things that you see are different? And from what you'd used before?
Yeah, I think we're just fundamentally changing how we measure our branding activity, right? It's well, we're not changing the way we measure it, is how we optimize against it, right? We're moving from causal relationships between large buckets of spend and something driving to very specific, like, hey, we know what creative works, we know what audience this message resonates with, and we know what channels are working, right? And that's what every marketer decision maker wants to know, is how do we make changes across those three areas.
Yep, outstanding. How about you, Larry?
Yeah, I think the exciting thing for us was understanding, especially the place where we were, was the idea of linking brand to a performance metric or business result was important, but more importantly for us was the fact that we were trying to shift the understanding consumers had of our brand. So in addition to knowing that brand can be linked to business results, appreciating any shifts in that brand perception and the way that they were driving our business results. We were trying to go from this one-time product, the vehicle history report that so many people know that people use to protect themselves from buying a car, to a lifetime product of helping people buy, own, sell their car. So that move for us was really important. Sachin, I know your brand perception is really important. I was wondering, maybe to kick off the question part, what brand attributes are really important for you? Are there particular brand attributes that you're seeing early on are linked to business results? Are there brand attributes that you're trying to amplify or grow?
So relevancy is the one that is our main measurement. That's what we're trying to optimize against. Understand where do people think IBM is a relevant company.
And you mentioned at one point that IBM wants to also be seen as an exciting brand, yeah?
Yeah, we're looking at a host of factors: relevancy, consideration, exciting, kind of the standard, I think, across the industry, what people are trying to measure in terms of brand.
Yeah, I think that the interesting part really about this discussion is that we could have had this discussion prior to this kind of a methodology, because you would have had brand tracking at this very, very high level at a monthly roll-up with very little movement from day to day, inability to connect the movement to a specific message and a specific media at detail, and then how that then would translate to future behavior, such as leads or sales or whatever. And so, I mean, I think it's kind of cool just to pause for a moment and say, wow, that's marketing had been struggling with the different silos of brand versus behavior, and now those can be integrated and thought of as being continuum and connected in some meaningful way.
So Sachin, what's the future look like for you guys at IBM? What are you ultimately hoping that the marketing evolution platform delivers for you, or where do you think your marketing goes from here?
Yeah, I think it's moving from that walk to run, right? It's getting more comfortable with the platform, being able to understand what the recommendations are out of it, and also being able to implement those. So I think that's one of the first steps to success. And then also, I think, is incorporating some of these other variables, right? So our brand perception is not driven just by IBM's activity, right? It's driven by the social chatter out there, driven by our competition, driven by economic factors. If we can figure out how to incorporate those into brand perception, I think that would be fantastic. And the third area that we want to sorry.
I was just saying, I'm so excited about that. Yes, that's more connection with the data.
Yeah, exactly. And the third area we want to do is solidify the relationship between us and performance marketing, right? So we did some analysis to show there is a relationship, but how can we use our output as an input into the performance marketing models, right? And that's one of the next key areas that we want to work on.
Well, and just to give some clear credit to Sachin as a thought leader in the space, a lot of times the analytics people have been somewhat reactive and have had an affinity towards measurement systems that they learned in school or that they've been comfortable with. I have to ask you, what you in some ways were visionary in terms of pulling forward the organization to say, hey, we got to do something different that can give us that broader view and can connect more data together. talk for a minute or two about. I mean, I don't mean to make you blush, but talk to me about.
Yeah, so IBM's an old organization. A lot of people have been doing things a certain way, and it's a challenge that we face. Me and the team face regularly is trying to get people bought into this. And I actually look to you guys, see if you have an experience of what's been successful in trying to move an old organization into a new concept and into a new way of thinking about advertising. If you have any experience with that.
A little bit, but I think the interesting part will be the degree to which we are crossing the chasm, and people begin, as you said, if they're used to the old ways, they begin to say, at what point is a new way actually safer and more reliable? I think we've crossed that. I think we've crossed that threshold. Where the Forrester wave will come out on Monday. People should read that and look at that. But even from the last one, we can tell that they already were seeing that turning point happen about 18 months ago when they did the last wave. So I'm actually interested in reading tonight about saying, I think that the headline that I saw was that they're seeing that that's mainstream. And so I think that that helps a lot, because then you can go back to some of the people and say, hey, this is actually the safest, this is now the more reliable, the safer technique.
And we've got a question.
Yeah, but it's also probably a long socialization process, so it's hand to hand.
Yeah, I think the socialization process is hard, right? Getting people to really buy into it, it's really challenging, and it's something that we're facing with constantly, even with our counterparts in analytics, right? We would think the analytics people are more progressive in terms of their thought, and we're still facing challenges there.
Yeah, and one other thing I'd say is that we just hired at Marketing Evolution a trainer, and she will start. She'll be at the Evolve Summit, which is next month. So we've got that certification. So sometimes maybe dragging some of those people to the certification conference with you. Let us know. We'll make some more seats available if we need to, or we'll bring the trainer on site to them to get them trained and hands-on. Because I think there's a demystification.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, because part of the problem is that some of this feels complicated, but when you go through the certification, and it is, but once you go through it, you're like, okay, I get it. I see how this works. I can explain this. There's a logic to it. It's open box. It's transparent. I get how it works.
Well, you and I often joke about like the theory of it and the complexity. Yes, there is that, but the system and the way that I think you guys have made it so intuitive and easy is, I don't come from an analytics or research background, and it's incredibly intuitive and easy to work with the system. But we do have a question from somebody about, maybe this is best for you, Rex, explaining how you connect all this data at the person level. How do you take all these elements, online and offline media, brand measures, and sales, and connect them at a person level? You said early on, about, and Sachin as well, about not measuring the 1% to identify what the 99% is doing. What are some of the ways that you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, the main idea is that we've, since the beginning of the company, we've had a person-based approach where everything connects back to a person. And so if somebody, basically it's an identity matching piece where we're saying, okay, if we've got a lead, we can pull it in from all the ads that are being served through email or through direct mail or from a digital platform. All of those are going to connect back to a person's identity. Now, the reality is that you don't have everybody matched. So here's where the magic happens, or the power happens, which is that I can take a census of all of your behavioral data, all your leads and your counts and type of domains, or any information you have about those sales and where they were going, and I can use that and say, that is the census, that is the reality. And so when I look at the match, I can say, well, how well does that subset of people that I can match represent reality? And if I have to weight it a little bit, okay, fine. I can now I know that everyone who's a match, a subset of all the people, is a true representative cross section of the total behavior that I've seen. We do the same thing with the data with branding. If it's meant to be nationally representative, we go back to experience, say, does it match the overall population, all the profile characteristics? And if we have to weight it a little bit, fine, but we're going to make sure that it's representative and matching. And then from that point, you can then take that subset of maybe a third of the population that you have a really clean, tight match on those different areas, and you can project those data, and you can do the lookalike models, and you can make the decisions about where do I buy more media, or where do I buy less, or which type of message was working with a profile of what kind of a person, so you can make the decisions.
Excellent. I think the other question we had from Adriana was very similar in context, so hopefully we've answered both those questions. Sachin, is there anything that you'd like to add in closing about your experience so far, or what you're hoping the next chapter holds?
No, so far it's been a fantastic experience. The simplicity and ease of implementation really kind of got us really excited about working with Marketing Evolution, and I'm just looking forward to growing this relationship with the Marketing Evolution team.
And Rex, maybe in closing, what's next for Marketing Evolution? What's on your, what's in your, your walk phase, your run phase here at the company, or what are you hoping to be able to deliver or excited about?
So I'll give you a few different things that I'm really excited about. The conference, the customer conference. The
Evolve Summit happening.
Yeah, the Evolve Summit is happening in what?
May 2nd and 3rd here in New York. Yeah, 3 weeks from today.
Yes. Yeah, so super excited about that. Number one, it's going to be a fabulous event. Kristen and Kristen, the two Kristens in the marketing part, our CMO and marketing managers, have just done a really great job of the full team pulling together an event that's twice the size of what it was last year. And we've got Damon John coming out to present and speak. That will be exciting. Even more exciting than the main day is the day before, where we're doing the certification, because that's when people get to be hands-on and engaged. And we're doing our first customer advisory board, the CAB. You were instrumental in suggesting we should do that as a former customer and getting that going. And I think Sachin's involved, and we've got some great people involved with the customer advisory board. That will give us direct priority about what's most important to automate and invest our development dollars around building out and advancing the product. So that whole 3 weeks from now, that's going to be a really exciting time. Beyond that, the other area that I'm really excited about is that John, Patty Glaude, and myself, and Patty Glaude was a former customer of ours at Victoria's Secret, and she's now leader in our product group. We've divided up all of our customers to where each of us is taking about a third of them to work with them directly, hands-on, going into their process and seeing how do we automate, or if they're sort of in that crawl phase, how do we get them to the walk phase? If in the walk phase, how do we help them get to the run phase? We're going to be training our account managers and DSMs to help support and train and move our customers forward. For the most part, what happened was we would kind of let the customers move at their own pace, and I feel like it's time for us to go in there and stand side by side with them and say, hey, let us give you a roadmap of what the next phase in this looks like for you. We can show you other customers and connect you with other customers that are at that future phase. Just like in this call where Sachin's at the crawl to walk, but you've already been to the walk to run phase. So it helps each other. And so I just think it's great when you've got a network of people that want to work together and help each other advance your careers, advance your company's success. And that's going to be 100% of what I'm going to be doing for the next 6 months, being engaged in that way.
Yeah, I hope that people found today practical and helpful. I think, I'm excited about the Evolve Summit. I know Regions Bank, Universal Studios is going to be presenting some real things you can take home on Monday to improve your marketing effectiveness, drive that higher marketing ROI. I'm really excited about you, John, and Patty going out on the road and helping people experience that. I think one of the hallmarks of working with Marketing Evolution is the realization of the fact of higher marketing ROI and the ability of people to connect to people who can give you real practical advice on how to realize that. So, Rex, thank you so much for taking the time today. Sachin, look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Thank you for joining us today. And
sure,
to everybody
thank you
else,
very much.
To everybody else, I hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you here in New York City, May 2nd and 3rd for the Evolve Summit. And visit the Marketing Evolution website. This coming Monday, you'll be able to download the latest copy of the Forrester Wave. Thank you very much.